Right then, well, welcome to our next Ask the Expert session, which is focusing all on home working, and I will do the introductions of who's joining us this morning. So we have got joining us Paul Coates from McCarron Coates.
Morning.
Give us a good morning, that's it. We've got Michael Harle from Northern Accountants.
Morning.
And Ryan Fraser from the Redefined group.
Morning, folks.
Good morning. So the reason we've decided to do a focus on home working is obviously as the furlough scheme is coming to an end, especially office-based businesses are now having to rethink how they're getting the staff back in the office. The government's obviously giving a little bit of a directive to encourage that now, because what we've seen is very, very quiet city centres, which is decimating businesses that are based there that rely on office workers to be there Monday to Friday. But there is an awful lot more to home working than maybe lots of employers think. Whilst we've had a period of furlough and lockdown, we've had obviously people working from home, which has been very much considered a temporary measure. What we now need to think about is what are the considerations that businesses are needing to make to have a more permanent arrangement, either for people that might be home working all of their week, or potentially doing a blended mix between maybe being in the office and working from home, which seems to be quite a popular option at the minute. Now, before I get underway by picking the brains of our experts this morning, I just wanted to start, obviously, from a HR perspective, to think about what are the kind of considerations you as a business need to make when you're starting to consider how your staff might work going forward. And the first thing would be, as with many things, you really should have in place a home working policy. And what that's going to do is touch on lots of the things that both Paul, Michael and Ryan are going to talk about with us this morning. It's considering some of the elements that you might need to think about other than just having somebody out of the office for a day or two a week. And in addition to that, obviously from a safety perspective, you are having to make more permanent assessments of the suitability of where somebody's going to be working. Because this isn't just for a short time period whilst we're in lockdown, this is thinking about where they're going to be on a permanent basis when they are working from home for you. And so you are still responsible for their safety. And so there is a risk assessment that you should be doing with all home workers that will cover, again, some of the points that particularly Ryan's going to talk about with us this morning. So first and foremost, I'm going to introduce you to Paul, and we're going to talk a little bit about his area of expertise, which is the insurance world. So obviously, as you are having staff working from home, there are implications to that. So I'm going to hand over to Paul to just give us his take on some of the things that you should be thinking about and putting into play to have people working from home. So Paul, do you want to introduce your business first of all, then give us a little bit of your take on the home working situation?
So my name is Paul Coates. I own an insurance broker called McCarron Coates Limited, based in Leeds. We specialise in commercial insurance, and we've been in our third year of trading, and I'm in my 23rd year of working in insurance, much to Ryan's surprise there, Ryan.
Looks far too young, doesn't it?
With the insurance side, Sarah, I guess it mirrors your work on the health and safety, in terms of you've got to provide a safe working environment for your staff, no matter where they are, whether they're in the office, whether they're out on site, whether they're at home. And the employer has got the obligation to the employee to make sure they've got that safe place of work. We deal with lots of different types of employers' liability claims. They could be at site, building sites, little bits and pieces in restaurants and bars. There could be motor vehicle accidents on the way to work, on the way on a working job. The most common ones are trips and slips through going up and down stairs where there's water on the floor, in the kitchens, in the bathrooms. There's wires that are left exposed. There's, the delivery man will deliver the paper and someone will go and trip over it. So with the trips and slips, and those things can happen at home, and even more so. So it's very difficult for the employer to regulate what the employee is doing at home. You've got to provide a safe working environment, because if somebody that works for you is working from home and they have an accident at home whilst working for you and being paid for you, then you can have an employer's liability claim. So again, you work with health and safety consultants to make sure the risk assessment is done adequately. Just little things like your display screen equipment and things like that, so people are putting claims in for RSI and other bits and pieces. But I guess the main focus for an employer if people are working from home is, do your employees have adequate home insurance? So a lot of home insurance policies don't cover working from home. When you're filling out your proposal form online, you always think it's the cheapest thing to do. It's, do you work from home? No. Do you have anyone visit your home? No. Do you spend more than 30 days out of your home? No. Do you have a burglar alarm? Yes. Is it always set? Yes. Do you have your key operator window locks? Yes. Everyone ticks everything to get the lowest price of home insurance. And people are not used to working from home, or the majority of people aren't used to working from home. So they'll tick that they don't work from home, got a small discount for that. If there's somebody working from home now, then you need to let the insurers aware. Given the current pandemic, most insurers are expecting people to work from home, and will be no additional charge to do so. But it's better to cover these things up front rather than wait until there's a potential claim. So if you have a claim on your household policy for a new IT system or a new computer, at 3 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon, your home insurers are going to ask you what you're doing at home on Wednesday at 3 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon working, when you declared you weren't working from home. Like I said, the insurance companies are pretty flexible at the moment, so it just needs to be something that they're aware of.
So that's quite interesting, because I never even thought, like you say, that there's the liability aspect of just employees working at home, and then, like you say, their own home insurance needs to cover, because, you know, where does it sit? Where does the liability sit when an employer's providing equipment, for example? If they're working from home permanently, you know, they might have had a short-term measure now with equipment, but they might needing to be make a more permanent feature of a home office, whether that be with furniture that Ryan's going to talk about, or computer equipment, printers, you know, where, you know, whose insurance would take the liability if those things are damaged at home? Would that sit with the employees?
It depends who owns it. So most people have got a laptop or a PC at home, but it might not be adequate to run the programs and software that you needed. So quite often, if you've seen now, there's hundreds and hundreds of millions of laptops being sold recently. Now they'll be, so we provide everyone here with a desktop PC to take home, but because we own it, we insure it. So we insured it as IT equipment away from our premises here to make sure it's in these guys' houses, so they don't have to pay any additional insurance premium for it. So there's two ways. Either if the guys have, if your staff have bought their own IT equipment, or they've got some newer IT equipment, then they need to insure it because it's theirs, and they need to ensure that that's insured adequately. If the employer has provided the employee with additional IT equipment, then the employer needs to make their insurance company aware, and insurance brokers and insurance company aware that this is being taken out of the home now, or taken away from the office.
So again, something that an employer should be declaring, or speaking to people like you that arrange their insurance to make sure their cover covers that kind of equipment away from the office premises.
Yeah, because usually people have on their office insurance, they'll have laptops away from the home, but they won't obviously have desktop PCs, because desktop PCs are exactly what it says in the tin.
Yeah, they sit in the office.
If you've got a dozen people working from home with £1,000 desktop PCs, then there's a big exposure for the business.
Yeah.
So you need to make sure that either the individual's home insurance extends to include it, if they're owning it, or if it's the employers, then make sure that they've extended their own office insurance to do that.
Yeah. So again, they're things that you don't always consider, do you? You consider the practicalities of, like in lockdown, it was just get people home, get people safe. But now, you know, if people have enjoyed that flexibility, or offices are trying to keep the footfall down to a minimum, maybe by having rotas where people are working at home and then in the office part of the week. Like you say, these are more permanent arrangements, and so sometimes you just overlook. But, you know, come a damaged expensive piece of equipment, then you've got a problem, haven't you, if you've not thought about it from an insurance perspective.
Yeah, I think the only other thing I was going to say on not just IT equipment, I guess it goes into what Ryan's doing. Ryan will be doing lots of new fit outs now for people, for offices going back to work and spending money on either office fit outs or, again, IT equipment, other bits and pieces. So a lot of businesses are taking the opportunity while people are away now to improve their office environment. Again, that's an insurance, that's the cost. So if someone spent, you know, £25,000 on updating their office and another 50 grand on IT equipment, they may forget about that to increase their insurance cover for their offices when they're going back.
Yeah.
So what we've seen in the last 2 or 3 weeks, as more and more people getting back to work, the sums insured are increasing. So people have bought new IT equipment, bought new telephone equipment, spent some money on various things in the office to make it a better place and easier place for people to work, whether it's social distancing or make it easier for people to work. So we've seen that the sums insured have increased from a lot of businesses going back.
Yeah.
So the
Yeah.
things that we've seen is some short increase when people are going back and making sure their IT equipment that they've got is actually, floating some shore between either various offices, because they've got several offices, or in their staff's home.
Yeah, that's great. Some top tips there, Paul. Thank you very much. And Ryan, that kind of leads us very nicely. A very good link there, Paul, as if it was planned. Leads us nicely onto, I suppose, your area of expertise, which obviously is around the office environment, but furniture and equipment that's going to be needed to work from home. So, like Paul's mentioned, I suppose there'll be two elements that you're seeing right now. There'll be those that need to start thinking about more permanent basis working from home and making sure that the staff have got a suitable setup. Sitting with your laptop on your knee on your sofa or a kitchen table, if you're doing that permanently, is not an ideal working environment. But then you've got the flip side where you do have people that are maybe returning with a blend of office and home work, and so lots of companies are really thinking about the office environment now, not only from a safety point of view, but I think it's looking at making that appealing for employees to want to be there in the time that they want them to be. So just talk us through from your perspective what you're seeing, and obviously for home workers, the kind of things you're recommending businesses think about at the minute.
Okay, no problem. So Ryan Fraser of Redefined Group, specialising in commercial furniture and also interiors. So there's a huge shift, as I've been for quite some time, where people are working from home, and a lot of people aren't even looking or contemplating returning back to the office, which also leaves, as sort of Paul mentioned there, sort of a big gap in respect of where people are working from home. What is the setup? And I'm not just talking about buying things, etc. It's where they're working from. So, as an example, if someone doesn't have a spare room, someone doesn't have an office, a box room, whatever it may be, and they can't have, let's say, a desk, that then leads to, they can't do any changes within their home, obviously. So that may mean they need to work from a kitchen table. That kitchen table could be shared with people throughout the day eating there, so you've got various implications and obviously struggles in that sense. As you mentioned there, some people, as you've heard, have got a tray on the lap with a laptop and they're crouched over and they're working. So as far as sort of the employers go, they can't do much in respect of someone's home. What they can do, though, is just ensure that the person who is working from home has got what they can have and what they can fit. So if someone can have a desk, or they've just got a table, then generally a table is generally that little bit lower than what a desk would normally be. But then when you put, then the big thing is then the chair what they're working from. So a lot of people work from a dining chair. It's a fixed chair, fixed back, no movement whatsoever, and no support. Over time, that's going to create a lot of issues, a lot of problems for someone's posture, obviously how they're sitting and the back pain. That's then going to lead obviously to issues potentially when they do return to the office, whether it be back end of this year, whether it be January, February, as a lot of people are saying, it could be March, it could be a little bit later. So certain things that the employer can do in respect of just ensure that the setup is right. So you've got people like, Paul's mentioned about the laptop. So if someone needs a laptop riser where the screen's a little bit higher, the eye line will have an infographic which people can download from yourself, Sarah, after this. But as long as the eye line's right, so people are slouched over looking down, need to make sure that the eye line is right. The gel wrist supports, if someone's using a keyboard, it's on a riser, they'll need a wireless keyboard. They may need a mouse, or they may need an ergonomic mouse where they're not using too much. Well, I say wrist action as such, but it's supported in that sense. You've also then got making sure that the 2 feet are flat on the floor, and it could be that they need a footrest. So certain little things that don't cost a lot of money just to make sure they're set up. I suppose the big cost would be if someone is using the kitchen table and they can have what I call it, an office chair, as everyone would recall it too. There's a certain functions that people need to make sure they've got. So gas lift, so that they can get the right height, so that they are sat properly, and obviously that they can use and they can type properly. Because if they're at that desk or that station, let's say, for 6, 7, 8 hours a day, they need to be making sure that in effect they've got a similar setup than they would do at work. And the problem is, if an employer says, "Listen, I can't give you X amount of money, I can't give you 100 quid, 150, 200 quid for a chair," that's then possibly the responsibility of the employee. And if that is their responsibility, then obviously then becomes a cost issue. But realistically, as you will probably go into, regards the health and safety side, really the responsibility is the employer. And I've actually dealt with a company in Wakefield where there's 17 staff, and they've said that 4 of their staff are definitely working from home until February next year. So they've actually got their office chair and they've brought it home just to save costs. So there's certain things that they can do to look at. But ultimately, if there's a mix, as people looking, some people looking at doing 1 day a week or every now and again to hand over jobs, etc. You need to make sure that you're sort of in effect mirroring the best you can someone's work space or workstation at home.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, people might think that there is a cost to buying some equipment, and I understand, for some businesses this has been a tough few months, and so they might not have tons of money sat in the bank to invest where they weren't expecting, but you're right, the potential cost if you don't do that, in terms of claims that might come in from employees because they're going to start getting health issues or problems from working in an environment that isn't fit for purpose. It will cost you further down the line. And so, a little bit of investment just to do the best you can, like you say, chairs you can get, and you can spend as little or as much as you want, really, can't you, Ryan? But
you can.
A decent office chair that's going to do its purpose is far better, like you say, than even just being sat on a dining room chair and table. It's not an ideal. Short term, I think everybody coped because we had to. But we do now need to start thinking about the work environment. And I think there will be lots of people that fall into the camp that you've mentioned, where they maybe don't have a spare room. So there isn't that you've got a home office set up. You are having to almost set your office up to work from home, sometimes 5 days a week, literally from a shared area. And so it's looking at the best of how you can make your space. Are there any tips for those that are in that situation? So obviously we've talked about chairs. What kind of options might be available if space is limited, but they still want to make sure they've got a permanent work area somewhere that could be utilised?
Options in regards to
what kind of furniture options? So with desks, can you get kind of very smaller work desks, so that you're not you think of an office desk and they seem huge, don't they? What are the home office options that you could help with?
So I mean, you could if you had a small corner within a room, ideally within that room where you can close the door and you've got your own space. You could get a very, very small square desk. That's not much, probably bigger than a ceiling tile in a general office. If you've got something that's around about 800 wide by 600 deep, that's not taking much footprint of a room. Then that would sit a normal chair, an office chair would say, quite comfortably. And then provided you've got the setup as we just mentioned, if you're using a laptop, it's going to be like Paul said, you're not going to a desktop really. For the home working, that's a big thing. But also, there's aside from that, then the well-being and as the mental health is a big thing at the moment. So just making sure, ideally, you've got natural light within that room is a big thing. Taking breaks, if you can take a break, take a 5-minute break, go walk around the garden, go walk up and down the steps or whatever. Just take a break. Make sure you're fueled with plenty of water, and making sure that you're in a nice setting or the best setting that you can be for that working. Obviously, a lot of people now, well, most people who are working from home, obviously, they've not got that commute to work. So whether that be a 15-minute, an hour each way, some people save 2 hours plus per day by not travelling. So when they're getting out there and they're going to different coffee shops, etc., maybe on the way to work, etc., that's not now happening. So people are generally cooped up at home, working all day, on the laptop, on the phone, and they're then finishing work, and then they're going to have the tea. There's a real sense where people go back to work and just do a little bit more, and there's not that break. So people need to make sure that they have got that break. If they're generally doing 7 hours, 8 hours at work, or 9 hours at work, that they don't sort of go over that, even in respect of I'll just do a few hours this evening. And there's also the great thing about working from home is also just checking with the employer that they're not ringing and checking and sort of monitoring people. But if they need to do set tasks within a set time, let's say 8 hours, for instance, like today, like yesterday, sun shining out there, and if they can take 2 hours and they do another 2 hours in the evening, then that's something also to look at and break up the day. It's not only just about cooped up and doing everything that you can. Just have a word with your employer, make sure that they're okay to do a little bit of flexi at home as well. And I think a good thing about that's great for the mind as well. So it's hard enough being cooped up at home by yourself, not being with colleagues and having a bit of a crack, etc., as people do. There's a general sense that you're very, very isolated in your own home, and then to try and maintain productivity and mental stigma is quite difficult, really. So, like I say, if you can get natural light in there, get the window open if you can, and obviously separate your work and your home life balance. That's quite a key thing. And also making sure that the setup is right is big, because ultimately, you know, your posture's big, and if you're returning back to work in January, February, and you've been sat wrong for all that time, you start getting niggles, then what's going to happen is you're going to be probably off sick with a bad back, and that's the last thing anyone wants. And the thing is let's be right with everyone here, this ain't going away anywhere anytime soon, certainly not. So the chances are you're going to be working at home for quite some time, and it's all right saying, yeah, it might be great in January, February, but you know, we've just take a step back now with the 6, etc. So you only got to look at, you know, the peaks and troughs as it may be.
Yeah.
Look at that, everything's great in December. Christmas comes, everyone's partying hard, everyone's doing what they're doing. Bang, we go back to another lockdown type scenario in January, February, and then you're back to doing what you do. So I would say, you know, make sure you invest in, you know, your employees. The employees look at investing in the employees. Make sure there's the right setup there. They've got really an obligation, as you'll know from the health and safety, and obviously from, you know, the insurance side, obligation to make sure they're right in the setup, and that's going to stand them in good stead, you know, for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we're focusing on homework in particular today, but what I will say for everybody, you know, when we do post this out, there will be some information that Ryan's mentioned, some slides that will be available. But, you know, obviously part of what Ryan does also is looking at your workspace, you know, both from a safety perspective, if you're having people coming and going from the office and the adjustments, but also, you know, from first hand, I know he's done all the offices here for us at Quest. It's just making a good work environment, because I think people have realised that actually that's a real value add for employees to want to be in the office, you know, to come in if they've got a nice working environment. Again, separate areas for breaks so that they can, you know, still be socially distanced but feel like they're away from the desk, and just have, you know, a nice space that's welcoming to come into makes a huge difference. So I'm sure for anybody thinking about that side of things today, much as we're not focusing on that right now, I would say absolutely get in touch with Ryan and have a look at some of the work he's done.
Yeah, well, just on that,
Thank you for that, Ryan.
Just one last note on that. So people who are at the offices, just as a quick little tip, what's not going to cost anyone any money, is if you can look at separating desks, if you've got the desk to separate, to get people back to the office. There's a big thing now where trying to get people back to the office. Obviously, there's a risk and a fear factor of doing that, which also needs to be weighed up and also assessed as does working from home. But if people are separate and the company just invests a little bit in a bit of space within their building for a bit of a breakout space for staff, and just makes it a little bit more appealing for people to come back, then obviously a little bit more normality will happen. I was speaking to someone down in Leeds who works for a big solicitors, where she was actually single, and she said, you know, I want to get back to the office. So she's gone back, and there's only a small amount of people who are back in the office. She's I might as well just stay at home. But the point is, a lot of people who are isolated in that sense do want to get back. So the employees need to make sure that the workspace is appealing and right and set up right for people to come back. And like I say, if they've got space or they've got a huge decrease in numbers, it's very easy to separate people. So there is a social distance element without getting new desks, without getting new chairs, just making sure it's set up right and they've got their own space.
Yeah, very true. Very true. Right, thank you for that, Ryan. And last but not least, we're going to move on to Michael. So, Michael, again, introduce yourself and your business. But what we're interested in picking your brains on really is the financial side of this. You know, are there any incentives for businesses, or, you know, what things can be considered, you know, from an expense point of view, where you've got people working from home rather than the office?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Michael. I'm one of the directors of Northern Accountants. Our head office is in Morley. We've also got presence in Doncaster, Ilkley and Hull. So really kind of just following on from some of the points that Ryan and Paul have made, if there are additional costs that the company is incurring, then the obvious thing to state would be that will be a cost of your respective business. In most circumstances, you're going to be able to claim corporation tax relief, and in a lot of circumstances, you're also going to be able to claim VAT relief as well and reduce your VAT liabilities on your normal quarterly VAT return. So again, a lot of these things, when you look at a baseline cost, it doesn't necessarily have to be that expensive. By the time you've taken off these reliefs, then it can significantly reduce some of your costs there. The other thing as well is that if an employer wasn't in the fortunate position where they could incur those costs on behalf of an employee. An employee, if they have incurred a cost and it's for business reasons, could claim tax relief themselves against their own personal tax liability. So there's a quick and easy form available on HMRC's website where if you're incurring business expenses as an employee, you can fill that form in, submit that to HMRC, and you would either receive an adjustment on your tax code, so you would pay less through your pay-as-you-earn employment, or in certain circumstances you might actually physically receive a refund, which is just a nice thing to have. But it's worth knowing that for employees, that they can also claim that tax relief back. Other things that you could do is, if you are working from home yourselves, a lot of directors through their own limited companies, which employees may not necessarily be aware of, will claim an allowance for use of home as office. Now HMRC allow you £6 a week, so you get tax relief on that £6 a week. Now most business owners would claim that through their company accounts, but if you as an employee were doing similar, then there's no reason why you may not be able to claim that also. So that's worth knowing. There may be other expenses that you're incurring that you wouldn't have incurred under normal circumstances. An obvious one being telephone costs, or a mobile phone that you are now using for business purposes. Mm-hmm. So again, as an employee, you may be able to go back to your employer and ask them to potentially reimburse you part of that cost. But even if you aren't, then you could still claim tax relief against that. So there are various reliefs available to both employers and employees there.
And are they, talking about, lots of employees, I know we've had the question through businesses we support, because they are saying, if I'm at home, it's using, especially as we approach winter months, and the sun isn't shining, you're going to have additional heating costs and lighting in your home. You might have additional costs. For example, you might have to upgrade your broadband, to have a speed at home, or like you say, telephone costs. Making those claims, is that something that's simple for them to do themselves when you say download a form, or really are they needing to get professional advice through an accountant or through their employers? How would you recommend they do that?
I could say that they would need professional advice to go and download this form, but the reality is, if you download the form from HMRC's website, then most employees, I would say, would be able to fill in a form and say, I've incurred £200 on this, and sign a form and send it back to HMRC. With the additional cost that you might incur from home, so the £6 a week that I refer to as an unreceipted allowance, but if you are incurring more than that, as long as it's receipted and as long as it's justified, then there's no reason why you couldn't claim additional costs. Yeah.
So they do need to keep records. So if they are incurring expenses, they need to keep those receipts if they're intending to.
If you're intending to make a claim,
usually by your employer or HMRC, you're going to need to show what the cost is, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, in some circumstances, HMRC may down the line come back and challenge some of the claims, particularly if some of the claims were disproportionate to the costs that you may have incurred, which of course you shouldn't be doing anyway. But if that were the case, then you should at least be able to prove what you've actually incurred. But I would say in most circumstances, if you're receiving a mobile phone bill, if you're receiving an electricity bill, if you're receiving a broadband bill, a lot of these, even if you don't physically have a hard copy, you should be able to log into your online accounts and get those retrospectively.
Yeah, that's great.
The other thing that I was going to say as well was just in terms of from an employer point of view, there are still grants available for some of the home working elements from a financial perspective. So whilst they will vary from council to council, it is still worth looking at some of the grants that are available from your respective local authorities to see what you can actually get back for your business.
Yeah, that's great. Great advice. Thank you all. Well, that kind of wraps up most of our session. What I would say is, what I alluded to right at the beginning is all the things that the chaps have talked about this morning are all elements that should be contained in a good home working policy. which every business really should be operating if you've got staff working for part or all of the time at home. And that will cover the different elements and expectations, who's providing what equipment, who's responsible for what in the home work environment, you know, insurance requirements. It may cover expenses and the financial elements of home working. But like with anything, it's to give clarity to your employees so that they understand exactly what the situation is. And if certain issues arise, it gives you a go-to for the agreement that you've made for people working from home. Needless to say, everybody on the call this morning would be more than happy to arrange to speak to you and your business in a bit more detail if what they've said strikes a chord with you. That goes without saying. And likewise, we've mentioned a few times, obviously, the fact that a lot of this will start with having comprehensive risk assessments. It's being able to make sure you are responsible for the well-being of your staff at work, and that, of course, in addition to the HR advice we give, is something that we can help with.
Just on that, Sarah, I know you guys requested the return to work risk assessment for us here for the COVID assessment.
Yes.
About desk spacing and hand sanitising and making each other drinks and crossing on the stairs and the toilets and the cleaning stuff. And that gave the staff here the comfort that we as a business are taking it seriously. So we got everyone to read it, sign it, spoke to them individually, spoke to them on a Microsoft Teams call, and that's given everybody the comfort to come back. We've also started having client meetings in the office now. Ian and Amy are out at a client meeting now. I've got somebody coming in to see me at 9:30 this morning, and pretty much every client we've seen, they've asked us if we've got a policy for that, to make sure we've got policy in the office. So I know this is not an insurance perspective, but more for you, Sarah, and for the Quest guys. And we found that really good for us, for the staff here, and for the people coming to the office, and for us going out seeing people. Like to give people the confidence, and that's what people need, I think, to come back to the office. Without that, I don't think we've got anybody back. So I think that's an important thing that the employers need to manage through.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And I think it is, we're seeing lots of calls and queries where businesses are wanting to manage staff back into the workplace. Like I say, it might not even be full-time, but just part-time. And actually the resistance they're getting is real worries about safety. Obviously, the government have said that as a business, you have to have a COVID secure risk assessment, which is exactly what Paul's talking about. What we've also seen is the fact that local authorities are now going out and auditing, and businesses are being closed down or fined if they've not done these things, because we have got to keep our workers safe first and foremost to get them back to work. So absolutely, all of this starts with making sure we understand the risks and that we manage those as an employer, and that's where we're happy to help you with. We are going to be having our next session is going to be focusing on a wellbeing point of view, some of the topics that Ryan's talked about this morning, actually, which is looking at more the mental health aspects where you might have not only challenges and concerns because of people being worried about the virus and the impacts of that, but we are working in an environment where you might have people more isolated, and so it is really thinking about how we manage that as business owners to make sure our staff are not just physically taken care of, but mentally as well. So we will certainly be promoting that over the next week or two, so do watch out for that next session. But on this note today, Paul, Michael, Ryan, thank you very much for your time and expertise.
Thank you.
And we will follow up. If any of you'd like to get in touch with any of the chaps this morning, then you can go to our website, and on our blog page will be the contact information for all of them that are featured on today's Ask the Expert. But on that note, thank you very much, and we will see you all next time.